The stagecoach rattled to a stop in front of the Austin, Texas depot on a sweltering June afternoon in 1875, kicking up dust that danced in the golden sunlight. Inside, Winifred Wilson clutched her small valise with white-knuckled fingers, her heart hammering against her ribs. This was it, the moment she'd traveled over 1,000 miles for, leaving behind everything she'd ever known in Philadelphia to marry a man she'd never met. "Last stop, Austin," the driver called, his voice rough from years of shouting over thundering hooves and creaking wheels. Winifred took a deep breath, smoothing down her traveling dress specially made for the occasion, though no amount of clever sewing could disguise her ample figure. At 22, she had long ago accepted that she would never possess the willowy silhouette so prized by society. What she hadn't accepted was a life of spinsterhood and pitying glances. That's why Vernon Walker's advertisement in the Matrimonial Gazette had seemed like divine providence. Rancher seeks bride, must be hardy, honest, and ready for frontier life. Age and appearance unimportant. Character essential. The other passengers disembarked while Winifred gathered her courage. Finally, she stepped down onto Texas soil, immediately squinting against the brightness of the sun. The heat pressed against her like a physical force, so different from the mild Pennsylvania summer she'd left behind. She scanned the busy street, searching for a man who might be looking for her. Her letter had described her as full-figured with auburn hair, and she'd included a small daguerreotype, though it showed only her face from a flattering angle. She'd been honest, but not foolishly so. A tall man approached, hat in hand. His face was weathered, with kind eyes crinkled at the corners. "Miss Wilson?" he inquired. "Yes," she replied, her voice barely audible over the street noise. "I'm Joseph Mills, friend of Vernon Walker. He asked me to fetch you to his ranch. He's tied up with a cattle matter but sends his regrets." Disappointment fluttered in her chest, but Winifred nodded. "I understand. Thank you, Mr. Mills." As Mills helped collect her trunk from atop the stagecoach, Winifred felt eyes on her. A group of men loitering outside the general store had taken notice of her arrival, and she heard their low whistles and chuckles. "That's Walker's mail-order bride," one of them said, voice carrying. "He said he needed a wife, not a whole family." Another guffawed. "Might break his poor horse's back." Heat flooded Winifred's cheeks, but she held her head high as Mr. Mills loaded her belongings into his wagon. She'd endured such comments all her life, they stung no less here than in Philadelphia, but she wouldn't give these strangers the satisfaction of seeing her crumble. "Pay them no mind, Miss Wilson," Mills said quietly as he helped her onto the wagon seat. Towns got nothing better to do than flap their jaws. The ride to Vernon Walker's ranch took nearly 2 hours, giving Winifred time to absorb the vast landscape of central Texas. Rolling hills gave way to scrubby plains dotted with cattle. The endless sky stretched blue above them, making her feel both insignificant and somehow free. Mills was kind but not talkative, answering her questions about the area with brief replies. When she inquired about Vernon Walker, he simply said, "Good man, fair, works harder than most." The wagon finally turned onto a long dirt drive leading to a modest but well-kept ranch house. A corral of horses stood to one side, a barn behind, and fields stretched beyond. It wasn't grand, but it had a solidity to it that spoke of care and permanence. As they approached, a tall figure emerged from the barn, striding toward them with purpose. Winifred's pulse quickened as the man came into focus, broad-shouldered and lean-hipped, with a confident walk that covered ground quickly. Vernon Walker, for it could only be him, reached the wagon just as it stopped. He was handsome in a rugged way, with dark hair and eyes the color of a summer storm. A scar ran along his jawline, and his skin was tanned from years under the Texas sun. He looked to be in his early 30s, and his expression was unreadable as his gaze fell on Winifred. "Mr. Walker," Mills nodded. "Brought your bride as requested." Vernon stepped forward, removing his hat. "Miss Wilson, welcome to Walker Ranch." Winifred gathered her courage and attempted to descend from the wagon without assistance, but her foot slipped on the step. Vernon moved with surprising speed, catching her before she could fall. His hands were strong and steady around her waist, and for a mortifying moment, Winifred was acutely aware of how easily he could feel her size. I'm sorry," she stammered, steadying herself. "The journey was long, and I'm afraid my legs are stiff." "No harm done," he replied, releasing her once she found her footing. His voice betrayed no judgment, but Winifred had learned to expect it, to see it coming before it arrived. Mills unloaded her trunk and smaller bags while Vernon showed her to the house. It was simple inside but clean and well-ordered. A main room combined kitchen and living space, with doors leading to what she presumed were bedrooms. "It's not much," Vernon said, watching her carefully, "but it's solid. No leaks in the roof, and the stove draws well." "It's lovely," Winifred replied truthfully. After the cramped boarding house room she'd shared with 2 other women in Philadelphia, this space felt luxurious. Vernon nodded toward one of the doors. "That'll be your room. I've been sleeping in the extra room since Pa passed last year." "Figured you'd want the main bedroom." Winifred blinked in surprise. "Your father's room. I couldn't possibly. It's yours now," he interrupted firmly. "Mills, would you mind taking Miss Wilson's things to her room?" Once Mills had deposited her belongings and departed with a tip of his hat, an awkward silence fell between Winifred and Vernon. She clasped her hands in front of her, suddenly unsure what to say to this man she had agreed to marry. Vernon cleared his throat. "You must be tired and hungry after your journey. I've got stew on the stove, nothing fancy, but it's filling." "Thank you, that sounds wonderful," she hesitated. "Mr. Walker, Vernon," he corrected. "Vernon, I think we should discuss our arrangement. Your letter mentioned a minister in town who could perform the ceremony." He nodded, moving to stir the pot on the stove. "Reverend Hayes, good man. But I figured you might want a few days to settle in first, get your bearings before we make it official." Relief and uncertainty warred within her. "That's thoughtful of you." Vernon ladled stew into 2 bowls and set them on the table. They ate in silence for a few minutes, Winifred conscious of every bite she took, wondering if he was watching, judging. Finally, Vernon spoke. "Your letters didn't mention why a woman like you would want to come all the way out here to marry a stranger." Winifred set down her spoon. "A woman like me, educated, well-spoken." His eyes met hers directly. "You don't seem desperate, is what I mean. Most women who answer advertisements like mine are running from something or have no other options." She considered how to answer. "Perhaps I wanted something different than what Philadelphia offered me. Perhaps I was tired of being judged for things beyond my control." Understanding flickered in his eyes. "The West isn't always kinder, Miss Wilson. People can be cruel anywhere." "I'm well aware," she replied, thinking of the men at the depot. "But at least here I might have purpose. In Philadelphia, I was merely an object of pity, a woman too large to attract a husband, too plain to compensate for it." She hadn't meant to be so blunt, and she immediately regretted her words. But Vernon didn't flinch or look away. "People talk too much about things that aren't their business," he said simply. "I need a partner, not a decoration. Someone with sense and heart who isn't afraid of hard work." He paused. "If that's not what you're looking for, there's no shame in saying so. I can arrange passage back east." Winifred felt something tight in her chest loosen slightly. "That's not what I want. I came here to build a life, Mr. Walker. I don't scare easily. A small smile touched his lips. Good, neither do I. He stood, collecting their empty bowls. Get some rest. Tomorrow I'll show you around the ranch. That night, lying in the unfamiliar bed in a room that still held traces of Vernon's father, a pipe on the dresser, a worn Bible by the bed, Winifred wondered if she'd made a terrible mistake. Vernon Walker seemed decent enough, but would he change his mind when he truly saw her for what she was? Would the whispers and laughter of the townspeople eventually poison whatever respect he might have for her? She turned onto her side, watching moonlight filter through the curtains. There was no going back now. She would face whatever came with the dignity her mother had taught her to maintain, no matter the circumstances. Morning came with the crow of a rooster and the smell of coffee brewing. Winifred dressed carefully in one of her plainer dresses, suitable for a tour of the ranch. When she emerged from her room, Vernon was already seated at the table, reading through what appeared to be ledgers. He looked up when she entered, and something in his expression made her pause. It wasn't distaste or disappointment, more like thoughtful assessment. Morning, he said, standing. Coffee's ready and there's bread and preserves if you're hungry. Thank you. She poured herself a cup, noting with approval how clean and organized the kitchen was. You keep a tidy home. Necessity. Ma died when I was 12. Pa and I had to learn to fend for ourselves. He closed the ledger. Though I'll admit my cooking skills leave something to be desired. Winifred smiled slightly. Well, that's something I can help with. I'm quite proficient in the kitchen. After breakfast, Vernon took her on a tour of the ranch. It was modest compared to some of the great Texas cattle operations she'd read about, but impressive nonetheless. 40 acres of good grazing land, a small herd of cattle, 6 horses, chickens, and a vegetable garden that had clearly seen better days. I try, Vernon said, gesturing to the sad-looking plants. But between the cattle and the horses and keeping the books, I don't have the time it needs. I could tend it, Winifred offered. I had a small garden back home. Vernon nodded, seeming pleased. That would be welcome. As they walked back toward the house, the sound of hoofbeats approached. A rider appeared, a young man with sandy hair who grinned broadly when he saw Vernon. Vern. He called, dismounting. Got those fence posts you needed? He paused when he noticed Winifred, curiosity evident on his face. Tommy, this is Miss Winifred Wilson, Vernon said. Miss Wilson, Tommy Carter, neighbor and occasional ranch hand. Tommy's eyes widened slightly as he took in Winifred's figure, but to his credit, his smile remained genuine as he tipped his hat. Pleasure, madam. You must be the bride Vern sent for. Yes, she replied, tensing for the inevitable comment or look. Well, he's a lucky man, Tommy said, surprising her. Not many women brave enough to come all this way. He turned to Vernon. Want me to unload those posts now? I'll help, Vernon replied. Miss Wilson, feel free to go inside if you'd like. Sun's getting strong. But Winifred followed them to the wagon, curious about the work of the ranch. As Tommy and Vernon unloaded heavy wooden posts, she overheard snippets of their conversation. Heard about it in town, Tommy was saying. Some of Mercer's boys running their mouths at the saloon. Vernon's face hardened. Doesn't matter. Just saying if I was you, You're not me, Vernon cut him off, glancing toward Winifred. And it's not worth discussing. She pretended not to have heard, but her stomach clenched. They were talking about her, about whatever cruel things had been said in town. That afternoon, while Vernon was out checking on the herd, Winifred threw herself into cleaning the house from top to bottom. Physical labor had always helped clear her mind, and by supper time, the floors shone and the windows gleamed. She was preparing a simple meal from the provisions in Vernon's pantry when he returned, stopping short in the doorway as he took in the transformed space. You didn't need to do all this, he said, removing his hat. I wanted to, she replied. It helps me think. Vernon washed up at the basin by the door, then sat at the table. They ate in companionable silence for a while before he spoke again. I was thinking we might go into town tomorrow. Get you introduced proper-like. Maybe visit the Reverend if you're ready. Winifred set down her fork. Are you certain that's what you want? Vernon looked at her, brow furrowed. What do you mean? I'm not what most men expect when they send for a bride. She forced herself to hold his gaze. I heard what those men said at the depot. I know what people think when they see me. Vernon's expression darkened. What exactly did they say? Nothing I haven't heard before, she said, trying to sound matter-of-fact. That I'm too large, that you got more than you bargained for. Vernon was silent for a long moment, his jaw working. Finally, he said, Do you want to know why I advertised for a bride, Miss Wilson? She nodded, heart in her throat. Because I'm 34 years old and I'm tired of being alone. Because this ranch needs children to inherit it someday. Because winter nights are long and spring mornings are too beautiful not to share. He paused. And because I've learned the hard way that what matters in a person isn't what they look like, but what they're made of. He touched the scar on his jawline absently. Got this in the war. Confederate shell took half my company and left me with a face that makes children stare. Came home to find my sweetheart had married my cousin, said she couldn't bear to look at me every day. His smile was wry. So you see, I understand something about being judged for your appearance. Winifred felt a surge of compassion. I'm sorry that happened to you. Don't be. Taught me what was worth caring about. He met her eyes. I've spent 2 days with you now, Miss Wilson. I've seen how you handle yourself, how you work without complaint, how you notice what needs doing. That tells me more about you than any looking glass ever could. She felt tears threatening and blinked them back. You're very kind. Not kind, practical. He leaned forward slightly. So I'll ask you again, do you want to visit the Reverend tomorrow? Winifred took a deep breath. Yes. I would like that. Vernon nodded once, decisively. Good. And after, we'll go to the general store. Ranch house needs curtains that aren't falling apart, and whatever else you think would make it more comfortable. The next morning dawned clear and bright. Winifred dressed in her best gown. A deep blue creation that her mother had insisted complemented her fair complexion and auburn hair. It was fashionable but modest, with clever seeming that did what it could to flatter her figure. Vernon, too, had dressed in his Sunday best, a dark suit that fit his broad shoulders well, hair neatly combed, boots polished. When he saw her emerge from her room, something flickered in his eyes that might have been admiration. You look lovely, he said simply. Thank you, she replied, surprised by the compliment. You clean up quite well yourself. The drive into Austin was pleasant, with Vernon pointing out landmarks and telling her about neighboring ranches. Winifred found herself relaxing in his company. His straightforward manner a refreshing change from the artificial politeness she'd known in Philadelphia society. As they approached town, however, her nervousness returned. She straightened her bonnet and smoothed her skirts, aware that first impressions would matter. Vernon seemed to sense her anxiety. Town's not so bad once you know your way around. Some good people here, though like anywhere, we've got our share of fools. The main street was busy with Saturday morning traffic, ranchers and farmers in town for supplies, ladies shopping, children darting between wagons. Vernon guided their wagon to a hitching post in front of a small white church. Reverend Hayes is usually here Saturdays, preparing his sermon, he explained, helping her down from the wagon. As they walked toward the church entrance, Winifred was conscious of curious glances from passers-by. She held her head high, refusing to shrink beneath their scrutiny. Reverend Hayes proved to be a kindly older man with spectacles and a gentle manner. He welcomed them warmly to his study, a small room lined with books. "Mr. Walker, a pleasure to see you, and this must be the bride you mentioned." He extended a hand to Winifred. "Welcome to Austin, my dear." "Thank you, Reverend," she replied, immediately liking his genuine smile. "Miss Wilson has agreed to become my wife," Vernon said. "We were hoping you might perform the ceremony." Of course," Hayes beamed. "When did you have in mind?" Vernon looked at Winifred questioningly. She considered for a moment. "Perhaps next Saturday," she suggested. "That would give me time to prepare the house and to be certain." Vernon nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Next Saturday it is, if that suits you, Reverend." "Perfectly," Hayes replied. "Shall we say 2 o'clock? That will give the ranchers time to finish their morning chores." With the details arranged, they took their leave. As they stepped back onto the street, Winifred felt a weight lift from her shoulders. 1 week. 1 week to be certain of her decision, to learn more about Vernon Walker and the life they might build together. "General store next," Vernon suggested, offering his arm. Winifred placed her hand on his sleeve, the gesture formal yet somehow intimate. "Yes, I'd like that." They had barely gone 10 paces when a group of men emerged from the saloon across the street. One of them, a burly man with a florid face, spotted them and nudged his companions. "Well, look here, boys. Walker's finally brought his mail-order bride to town," he called loudly. Vernon's arm tensed beneath Winifred's hand, but he kept walking, steering them toward the general store. "Ignore them," he murmured. But the men were crossing the street now, intercepting their path. The leader, clearly half drunk despite the early hour, planted himself directly in front of them. "Mercer," Vernon acknowledged coldly. "Move aside." "Don't be unfriendly, Walker," Mercer grinned, his gaze sliding to Winifred. "Just wanted to meet the lady. We were all mighty curious after Mills described her." Winifred felt her face flush hot with embarrassment and anger. "Miss Wilson, this is Hank Mercer," Vernon said, his voice tight. "He owns the Diamond M Ranch north of here, and he was just leaving." "Now, don't rush off," Mercer said, ignoring Vernon to address Winifred directly. "Tell me, Miss Wilson, what's a big girl like you doing out here in Texas? Couldn't find a man back east willing to take you on?" Vernon moved so quickly Winifred barely registered what was happening until Mercer was stumbling backward, hand to his jaw where Vernon's fist had connected. "You apologize to the lady," Vernon said, his voice dangerously quiet. Mercer's face contorted with rage. "You'll regret that, Walker." He spat on the ground. "Enjoy your fat bride. She's all you could get, I reckon." Vernon's hands clenched into fists again, but Winifred laid a restraining hand on his arm. "He's not worth it," she said steadily, loud enough for Mercer to hear. "Men like him use cruel words to mask their own inadequacies." She turned to Mercer, meeting his gaze squarely. "I pity whatever woman has the misfortune of your company, sir." With that, she tugged Vernon toward the general store, aware of the small crowd that had gathered to watch the confrontation. Her heart was pounding, but she refused to show how deeply Mercer's words had cut. Once inside the store, Vernon turned to her, concern etched on his face. "I'm sorry about that. Mercer's had it in for me since I outbid him on a prize bull last year." "It's not your fault," Winifred said, trying to calm her trembling hands. "But perhaps this is what our life will be like. Perhaps I'll always be a source of ridicule for you." Vernon's expression softened. "Winifred," he said, using her given name for the first time, "you're not the source. Their small-mindedness is." He touched her cheek lightly, the gesture surprising them both. "You're perfect just as you are." Something warm unfurled in Winifred's chest at his words, but before she could respond, the storekeeper approached, a friendly-looking woman in her 50s. "Vernon Walker, is this your bride I've been hearing about?" she asked, beaming at Winifred. Mrs. Davis, this is Miss Winifred Wilson, Vernon introduced them. We're to be married next Saturday. Wonderful news. Mrs. Davis clasped Winifred's hands warmly. I'm Martha Davis, dear. My husband and I run the store, and I'm so pleased to meet you. We need more sensible women in this town. Winifred smiled, grateful for the kind welcome. It's lovely to meet you, Mrs. Davis. Now, what can I help you with today? Mrs. Davis asked. Miss Wilson needs to outfit the house properly, Vernon replied. Curtains, linens, whatever women like to make a house comfortable. Mrs. Davis laughed. Well, that gives me plenty to work with. Come, dear, let me show you what we have. For the next hour, Winifred lost herself in the pleasure of selecting household goods. Vernon followed patiently, offering occasional input but mostly deferring to her judgment. When she hesitated over the price of a particularly lovely set of dishes, he quietly told her to add them to their purchases. By the time they finished, the wagon was loaded with parcels, curtains, tablecloths, dishes, cooking utensils, and several lengths of fabric that Mrs. Davis assured her could be fashioned into cushion covers and quilts. As Vernon helped her back into the wagon, he said, I thought we might stop at the hotel restaurant for dinner before heading back, unless you'd rather not, after what happened. Winifred considered for a moment, then straightened her shoulders. I would like that. I won't let bullies like Mercer dictate where I can go. Vernon's smile was approving. That's the spirit. The hotel dining room was modest but clean, with white tablecloths and polished silverware. Several diners glanced their way when they entered, but if any harbored thoughts similar to Mercer's, they kept them to themselves. Their meal was pleasant, the food better than Winifred had expected. Vernon told her more about the ranch, his plans to expand the herd, the challenges of Texas ranching, the drought 2 years ago that had nearly broken them. But we survived, he concluded. Walker men are stubborn that way. And Walker women? Winifred asked, then blushed at her presumption. Vernon looked thoughtful. My mother was the strongest person I've ever known. Came from Boston as a young bride, never complained about the heat or the hard work or the loneliness. Made that ranch a home. He paused. I think she would have liked you. The compliment warmed her more than it should have. Tell me more about her. Vernon rarely spoke of his family, she learned over the next hour. His mother had died of fever when he was 12, his father just last year of heart failure. He had no siblings. The ranch was his heritage and his future. What about your family? He asked as they finished their meal. Winifred sighed. My parents died within months of each other 3 years ago. My father was a clockmaker, skilled but not wealthy. After his death, I took in sewing to support myself, but it was difficult. She didn't elaborate on the pitying glances from former friends, the gradual exclusion from society events, the whispered comments about poor Miss Wilson that followed her through Philadelphia's streets. She didn't need to. Vernon's eyes held understanding. And now you're here, he said simply. Yes, she agreed. Now I'm here. The week that followed was one of the happiest Winifred could remember. Each day brought new discoveries about the ranch, about Vernon, about herself. She threw herself into making the house a home, hanging curtains, arranging furniture, planning and preparing meals that made Vernon's eyes light up with appreciation. For his part, Vernon included her in discussions about the ranch, explaining his breeding program for the cattle, showing her the ledgers that tracked expenses and profits. He was a meticulous record keeper and a forward thinker, planning years ahead. They fell into an easy rhythm, working separately during the day, Vernon with the cattle, Winifred with the house and garden, then coming together in the evenings to share meals and conversation. Sometimes they sat on the porch afterward, watching the stars emerge while Vernon smoked his pipe and Winifred worked on mending or embroidery. It was during one such evening, 3 days before their wedding, that Vernon asked the question she'd been dreading. "Why did you never marry in Philadelphia?" Truly, Winifred's hands stilled on her needlework. "I told you, men find women of my size unappealing." "Some men, perhaps," he acknowledged, "but surely not all." She sighed, searching for words to explain. "In society, at least, the society I knew, a woman's appearance is her primary asset. I was tolerated because my family was respectable, but never sought after. The few suitors I had were men looking for a caretaker for elderly parents or a mother for existing children. Never someone who wanted me for myself." She paused. "After my parents died and our circumstances changed, even those offers disappeared." Vernon was quiet for a long moment, puffing on his pipe. Finally, he said, "Their loss." Winifred glanced at him, surprised by the firmness in his tone. "I mean it," he continued. "Any man fool enough to overlook a woman of your intelligence, capability, and kindness because of something as meaningless as size deserves to end up alone." "You're very kind," she murmured. "I'm not being kind, Winifred. I'm being honest." He turned to face her directly. "These past days, watching you transform that house, seeing how quickly you've adapted to ranch life, it's impressive. You're impressive." Her cheeks warmed at the unexpected praise. "Thank you. Which brings me to something I've been meaning to ask." Vernon set aside his pipe. "Our wedding is in 3 days. We've spoken of many things, but not of what kind of marriage you expect." Winifred's breath caught. "I'm not sure I understand." "Some couples marry for convenience or security," he said carefully. "Others for deeper reasons. I want you to know that whatever you're comfortable with, I'll respect." She understood then what he was asking, and heat flooded her face. I had hoped for a true marriage," she admitted softly. "In time, at least, when we know each other better." Vernon nodded, relief visible in his expression. "I had hoped the same." Their eyes met in the darkness, and something shifted between them, an acknowledgement of possibility, of desire carefully banked but present nonetheless. The day before their wedding brought unexpected visitors. Winifred was in the garden, harvesting vegetables for supper, when she heard the sound of approaching horses. Looking up, she saw 3 women on horseback coming up the drive. She stood, brushing dirt from her apron as they dismounted. The leader was a striking woman in her 30s with dark hair and confident bearing. "You must be Miss Wilson," she called. "I'm Sarah Johnson. This is Mary Whitfield and Elizabeth Cooper. We're neighbors, though neighbor means something different out here than back east." She smiled warmly. "We've come to welcome you properly." Winifred was touched by the gesture. "That's very kind of you. Please, come inside." Over coffee and the apple cake Winifred had baked that morning, the women chatted easily. They were ranchers' wives, practical women who'd faced the challenges of frontier life and thrived. "Vernon Walker is one of the good ones," Sarah confided. "My husband says he's the most honest man in the county." "And handsome, too," added Elizabeth, the youngest of the 3, with a teasing smile. "You've done well for yourself, Miss Wilson. Please call me Winifred," she replied, warming to these straightforward women. "And yes, I believe I have." "We heard about what happened in town with Hank Mercer," Mary said, her expression darkening. "That man is a menace." Winifred tensed. "Word travels fast, it seems." "It's a small community," Sarah explained, "but don't you worry about Mercer. His bark is worse than his bite, and most folks around here have no use for his kind of meanness." "We wanted you to know," Mary added, "that you're welcome here. Not everyone is like Mercer." Elizabeth nodded vigorously. "We're having a quilting bee next month at my place. We'd love for you to join us." By the time the women left, promising to see her at the wedding the next day, Winifred felt lighter than she had in years. For the first time since arriving in Texas, She dared to believe she might find not just a husband here, but friends as well. Vernon returned from the fields to find her humming as she prepared supper, her cheeks flushed with happiness. "You look pleased about something," he observed, washing up at the basin. She told him about the women's visit. "They were so kind, Vernon, nothing like the society ladies back home." He smiled. Frontier life strips away pretenses. Out here, what matters is whether you're honest, hardworking, and a good neighbor. Everything else is just window dressing. That evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and purple, Vernon reached over and took her hand. The gesture was simple, but profound, the first time he'd initiated such contact outside of practical assistance. "Nervous about tomorrow?" he asked quietly. "A little," she admitted. "You, a little," he echoed, a smile in his voice, "but certain." She turned to look at him, finding his face closer than expected. "Certain that I made the right choice," he clarified. "That you're the right woman to share this life with." Winifred's heart fluttered. "I hope I won't disappoint you." Vernon's eyes were serious in the fading light. "You couldn't." He hesitated, then added, "May I kiss you, Winifred? Just once before tomorrow makes it proper." She nodded, unable to form words as he leaned forward. His lips met hers gently, a whisper of contact that nonetheless sent warmth spiraling through her. When he pulled back, his expression was tender in a way she'd never seen before. "Until tomorrow," he said softly. That night, alone in her room for the last time, Winifred touched her lips, remembering the feel of Vernon's mouth against hers. Tomorrow she would become his wife. Tomorrow would begin the rest of her life. The wedding day dawned clear and perfect, with a gentle breeze tempering the Texas heat. Winifred dressed with trembling fingers in the gown she'd carefully packed for this occasion, cream-colored silk with lace trim, the most beautiful dress she'd ever owned. She arranged her hair in a simple but elegant style, pinning small white flowers from the garden into the auburn waves. Vernon had left at dawn to give her privacy, saying he would return at noon to escort her to the church. True to his word, she heard his wagon arrive just as the mantel clock struck 12. When she emerged from her room, Vernon stood waiting in the main room, handsome in a new black suit, his dark hair neatly combed. The look on his face when he saw her made her heart stop. Wonder, admiration, and something deeper that she dared not name. "Winifred," he breathed, "you're beautiful." She blushed, unused to such open appreciation. "Thank you, you look very handsome yourself." He offered his arm, ready to become Mrs. Walker. The church was filled with more people than Winifred had expected, neighboring ranchers and their families, townspeople she hadn't yet met, all curious about Vernon Walker's bride. She felt their eyes on her as Vernon escorted her down the aisle, but for once, she didn't mind. The warmth of Vernon's hand on hers gave her courage. Reverend Hayes smiled benevolently as they took their places before him. The ceremony was simple but meaningful, the traditional words carrying weight as Winifred and Vernon pledged themselves to one another. When Vernon slipped a plain gold band onto her finger, his mother's, he told her Winifred felt tears prick her eyes. This was real. This man, this good man, was choosing her, just as she was choosing him. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," Reverend Hayes declared. "Mr. Walker, you may kiss your bride." Vernon's kiss was gentle but firm, a promise sealed before witnesses. When they turned to face the congregation as man and wife, Winifred was surprised by the genuine applause that greeted them. The celebration afterward at the hotel was modest but joyful. Neighbors and townspeople approached to offer congratulations, many introducing themselves to Winifred with genuine welcome. Mrs. Davis from the general store brought a beautiful quilt as a wedding gift. Sarah Johnson and her friends made sure Winifred was introduced to everyone. Even Hank Mercer's absence couldn't dampen the day, though Vernon quietly informed her that Tommy Carter had heard rumors Mercer was planning some sort of disruption and had enlisted several ranch hands to ensure he stayed away. As evening fell and the celebration began to wind down, Vernon leaned close to his new wife. Ready to go home? The word home sent a thrill through Winifred. Yes, Walker Ranch was home now, her home with Vernon. The ride back to the ranch was quiet, both of them tired from the day's emotions but content in each other's company. As they approached the house, now visible in the moonlight, Vernon suddenly drew the wagon to a halt. "What is it?" Winifred asked, concerned. Vernon turned to her, his expression serious. "Before we go in, I want you to know something. This marriage, it's real to me, Winifred, not just a convenience or an arrangement. I may not be a man of many words, but I promise to be a good husband to you, to respect you, provide for you, and in time, I hope, to love you properly." Winifred's breath caught at the sincerity in his voice. "Vernon, you don't need to say anything," he interrupted gently. "I just wanted you to know where I stand. But I want to say it," she insisted. "This is real for me too. When I answered your advertisement, I hoped for security, for a chance at a new life. I never expected to find someone like you, someone who sees me, truly sees me." She placed her hand on his. "I can't promise I'll be perfect, but I'll be the best wife I know how to be." Vernon's smile in the moonlight made her heart flutter. "That's all I could ask for." He picked up the reins. "Now, Mrs. Walker, shall we go home?" At the house, Vernon surprised her by lifting her into his arms to carry her across the threshold. Winifred gasped, instinctively clutching his shoulders. "Vernon, I'm too heavy." "Nonsense," he replied, his strong arms holding her securely as he pushed open the door and carried her inside. "My wife deserves to be treated properly on her wedding day." He set her down gently in the main room, which looked different, somehow more like a home than it had that morning. Winifred realized someone had been here while they were at the wedding. Fresh flowers stood in a vase on the table, and a small wrapped package waited beside it. "Tommy and his wife," Vernon explained, seeing her surprise. "They offered to come by and add a few touches." The package contained a beautiful hand-carved wooden frame holding a pressed wildflower. A note from Tommy's wife read simply, "To remember your wedding day in Texas. Welcome to the family." That night, as they prepared for bed, Winifred found herself nervous despite Vernon's earlier reassurances. When she emerged from behind the screen in her nightgown, she found him waiting, seated on the edge of the bed in his nightshirt. "We don't have to rush anything," he said quietly, reading her anxiety. "We have time." Gratitude washed through her. "Thank you." They lay side by side in the darkness, not touching at first, the space between them charged with awareness. Then Vernon reached out, taking her hand in his. "Good night, Mrs. Walker," he murmured. "Good night," she whispered back, his touch an anchor in this new life they were beginning. The days that followed settled into a rhythm of married life that felt both strange and wonderfully right. Vernon was a considerate husband, neither demanding nor distant. Each day they learned more about each other: Vernon's unexpected fondness for poetry, Winifred's skill with numbers that soon had her helping with the ranch accounts, their shared love of quiet evenings and good conversation. And each night, the distance between them in bed grew smaller, their touches more frequent and lingering, until one night, 2 weeks after their wedding, Vernon's goodnight kiss deepened into something more. His hands, always so careful with her, became bolder, and Winifred responded with a passion that surprised them both. Afterward, lying in his arms, Winifred felt tears slip down her cheeks, not of sadness but overwhelming gratitude. Vernon had made her feel beautiful, desirable, worthy of tenderness. "Did I hurt you?" he asked, concerned when he felt her tears. "No," she assured him. "I'm just happy." He kissed her forehead, pulling her closer. "So am I, Winifred, so am I." Summer gave way to fall and fall to winter. Winifred bloomed in her new life, gaining confidence as a rancher's wife. She learned to ride, to help with calving, to manage the household through drought and storm. The garden flourished under her care, providing vegetables for their table and enough to preserve for winter. They made occasional trips into Austin, where Winifred was gradually accepted by the community. There were still whispers, still occasional cruel remarks, but they mattered less and less as her circle of friends grew. Sarah Johnson and the other ranch wives became dear companions, sharing advice, recipes, and the unique camaraderie of women carving out lives on the frontier. Hank Mercer remained a problem. His dislike of Vernon seemed to have transferred to Winifred, and he never missed an opportunity to make cutting remarks when they encountered him in town. But Vernon's steady support and the community's growing respect for Winifred as Mrs. Walker formed a shield against his meanness. One crisp December morning, Winifred woke feeling queasy for the third day in a row. She dismissed it as a passing illness, but when the smell of coffee, usually so appealing, made her stomach lurch, she knew. She waited until evening to tell Vernon, when they sat before the fire after supper. His reaction, joy mingled with concern and tenderness, confirmed what she'd already come to know. That in Vernon Walker, she'd found not just a husband but a partner and friend whose love for her was as steady as the Texas landscape surrounding them. "Are you pleased?" he asked, his hand protectively covering hers. "Very," she assured him, though a bit frightened too. "We'll face it together," he promised, "whatever comes." Spring brought new life to Walker Ranch, not just in the form of calves and crops, but in the swelling of Winifred's belly as their child grew. Vernon was attentive to the point of hovering, which amused and touched her in equal measure. "I'm not made of glass, Vernon," she chided gently one afternoon when he insisted on taking over the bread making because the dough needed vigorous kneading. "I know," he replied, his hands working the dough with surprising skill, "but you're carrying something precious." The words warmed her. "We both are," she corrected, placing her hand over his on the dough. "This child is ours together." Vernon's answering smile held all the love that had grown between them over the months of their marriage, love that had started as respect and partnership, but had deepened into something neither had dared hope for when they'd first exchanged letters. They brought their son into the world after a difficult but ultimately successful labor. James Vernon Walker had his father's dark hair and his mother's determined expression, and from his first lusty cry, he had both parents wrapped around his tiny finger. "He's perfect," Vernon whispered, cradling his son with hands that could break a wild horse but now trembled with emotion. Just like his mother, Winifred, exhausted but radiant, watched her husband and child with a heart so full it threatened to overflow. "We did well, Mr. Walker." "Indeed we did, Mrs. Walker," he agreed, bending to kiss her forehead. "Indeed we did." Their life expanded to accommodate this new member of the Walker family. James thrived under the loving attention of his parents and the entire community. Even Hank Mercer seemed to have lost interest in tormenting them, his attention diverted by financial troubles that had him spending more time at the bank than the saloon these days. "Every dog has his day," Tommy Carter observed when he came to help Vernon with spring branding. Mercer spent years building enemies instead of friends. Now when he needs help, there's none to be found. Winifred, watching from the porch with James in her arms, felt a momentary pang of sympathy for the man, despite everything. But her attention was quickly reclaimed by her son, whose smile was beginning to resemble his father's. One Sunday after church, Reverend Hayes pulled Vernon and Winifred aside. "I have something that might interest you," he said, leading them to his office. "The school board is looking for a teacher for the fall term. Our last schoolmarm got married and moved to Dallas." He looked meaningfully at Winifred. "Your education and bearing haven't gone unnoticed, Mrs. Walker. Several parents have already expressed interest in having you consider the position." Winifred blinked in surprise. "Me? A teacher? You'd be excellent," Vernon said immediately. "You've already taught Tommy's oldest boy more arithmetic in 2 afternoons than he learned all last year." "But James," she began, "is old enough that Sarah Johnson or one of the other women could mind him during school hours," Vernon pointed out. "If it's something you'd want." Winifred considered the possibility. Teaching had been a dream once before her parents' deaths had forced her into sewing work. "I would need to think about it." "Of course," Reverend Hayes nodded. "The position wouldn't start until September. Take your time." That evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, James asleep in his cradle beside them, Winifred broached the subject again. "You truly think I could teach the town's children?" Vernon took her hand, a gesture that had become natural between them. "I think you could do anything you set your mind to. You've already proven that." She leaned against his shoulder, considering. "It would mean time away from the ranch from you." "The ranch will survive," he assured her. "And I'd be proud to have my wife sharing her knowledge with the next generation." He paused. "But only if it's what you want." Winifred thought of the satisfaction she'd felt teaching Tommy's son, the light in the boy's eyes when he finally understood a difficult concept. "I think it is." September found Winifred standing before 15 students ranging in age, from 6 to 16, in Austin's small schoolhouse. Her initial nervousness faded as she lost herself in the familiar rhythm of lessons and learning, discovering that many of the children were eager for knowledge despite their frontier upbringing. The school board had been surprised by her methods, less rigid than the previous teachers, with more emphasis on understanding concepts than rote memorization, but the children's progress soon silenced any doubts. By Christmas, even the most skeptical parents were praising Mrs. Walker's school. At home, Vernon managed both the ranch and little James during school hours with the help of a young woman from town who came to mind the baby. Winifred sometimes marveled at how seamlessly their life had adapted to these changes, how Vernon, raised in a time and place where men and women's roles were strictly defined, had embraced her work outside the home with pride rather than resentment. "My father would be shocked," he admitted one evening as they prepared for bed. "But my mother would have understood. She always said talent was a gift meant to be used." Winifred kissed him, grateful beyond words for this man who continued to surprise her. "I love you, Vernon Walker." "And I love you, Winifred Walker," he replied, gathering her into his arms. "More than I ever thought possible when I placed that advertisement." As their second wedding anniversary approached, Vernon began disappearing on mysterious errands, returning with a secretive smile that both intrigued and amused Winifred. "Patience," was all he would say when she questioned him. On the morning of their anniversary, he woke her before dawn. "Get dressed," he whispered. "I have something to show you." Curious, Winifred followed him outside where a wagon waited, already hitched and loaded with what appeared to be a picnic basket and several blankets. "Vernon, what—" "You'll see," he promised, helping her onto the seat. They drove for nearly an hour, the sky lightening around them, until Vernon turned the wagon onto a narrow track leading up a gentle slope. At the top, he stopped, helping Winifred down. Before them stretched a view of the surrounding countryside, rolling hills, the distant sparkle of a creek, and the first rays of sun turning the landscape golden. "It's beautiful," Winifred breathed. "It's ours," Vernon replied. "All of it. I bought it last month from the Johnsons." Sarah's husband decided to take that job in San Antonio after all. Winifred turned to him, stunned. "You bought more land, but I thought that we couldn't afford it," Vernon smiled. "Your teaching salary plus the extra we made from breeding those Herefords last year. It was enough for a down payment. The rest will pay over time." He took her hands, his expression earnest. "I want to build something that will last, Winifred. Something for James and for any brothers or sisters he might have. A legacy." Winifred felt tears well up. "Oh, Vernon." "There's more," he said, leading her a few paces to where a stake had been driven into the ground with a red ribbon tied around it. "I thought we might build a proper house here. Something with enough room for a growing family, and a study for you to prepare your lessons." Winifred could see it in her mind's eye, a house with wide porches to catch the breeze, windows to frame this magnificent view, rooms filled with books and laughter and love. "When can we start?" she asked, her heart full. Vernon laughed, pulling her into his arms. "That's my Winifred. Always looking forward." He kissed her, then rested his forehead against hers. "We can begin planning right away. Building will have to wait until after spring calving." They spread blankets on the ground and shared the breakfast Vernon had packed, watching the sun rise fully over what would be their new home. As Winifred leaned against her husband's solid warmth, she reflected on the journey that had brought her here. 2 years ago, she had been a lonely seamstress in Philadelphia, with little hope for a future beyond endless days of sewing and nights of solitude. Now she was Mrs. Vernon Walker, teacher, mother, rancher's wife, and beloved partner to a man who had looked past what others saw to the person she truly was. "What are you thinking about?" Vernon asked, noticing her thoughtful expression. Winifred smiled, squeezing his hand. "About how perfectly things worked out despite how they began." Vernon nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Some people can't see past appearances to what really matters." He brushed a strand of hair from her face. "Their loss is my gain." When they returned to the ranch, Sarah Johnson was waiting with James, who toddled excitedly toward them when they entered. Vernon scooped up his son, tossing him into the air to make him giggle. "Well," Sarah asked Winifred, "did he show you? You knew," Winifred laughed. "Of course you did." Sarah's eyes twinkled. "Who do you think helped him pick the spot? Men have no eye for where a house should sit." She hugged Winifred. "I'm so glad it's you taking over our land. Couldn't bear to think of strangers living there." That evening, after James was asleep, Vernon and Winifred sat at the kitchen table with paper and pencils, sketching ideas for their new home. Their heads bent close together. They debated the merits of different layouts, occasionally pausing to share a kiss or simply smile at each other. "Do you ever regret it?" Vernon asked suddenly. "Answering my advertisement, coming to Texas," Winifred considered the question seriously. "There have been difficult moments," she admitted. "Times when Mercer or others made me feel unwelcome. Times when I missed the familiarity of Philadelphia or doubted my ability to adapt to ranch life." She reached across the table, taking his hand. "But regret? Never, not for a single day." Vernon's smile was tender. "Nor I. From the moment you stepped down from that stagecoach, nervous but so determined, I knew you were someone special. Even though I wasn't what you expected," she teased gently. "You were exactly what I needed," he corrected. "A woman with courage, intelligence, and a heart big enough to take on this life with me." His thumb caressed her palm. "Your size has never mattered to me, Winifred. It's who you are that I fell in love with." She leaned across the table to kiss him, her heart full of gratitude for this man who had given her not just a home, but a place where she truly belonged. As the years passed, the Walker Ranch prospered and grew. The new house on the hill became a landmark, known for its welcoming porches and the laughter that often spilled from its windows. James was joined by a sister, Emma, and later by twins Robert and Rose, a family larger and happier than Winifred had ever dared to dream of in her Philadelphia days. Winifred continued teaching until the school board persuaded her to become the school's headmistress, overseeing a growing staff as Austin expanded. Her innovations in education brought notice from as far away as Dallas, and occasionally she was invited to speak at teachers' conferences. Invitations she accepted with Vernon's proud encouragement. Vernon himself became a respected figure in county affairs, his fair dealing and sound judgment leading to positions on the Cattlemen's Association and eventually the town council. Together, the Walkers were a force for progress and compassion in a community still forming its identity. And if newcomers sometimes raised eyebrows at the sight of the statuesque Mrs. Walker beside her lean, handsome husband, they soon learned what the people of Austin had come to understand years before, that Winifred and Vernon Walker's marriage was one of the strongest in the county, built on a foundation of respect, partnership, and deep, abiding love. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Vernon surprised Winifred with a party at their hilltop home, inviting friends from across the county. As twilight fell and lanterns were lit around the wide porch, Vernon raised a glass in toast. "To my wife," he said, his voice carrying across the gathered crowd, who took a chance on a lonely rancher's advertisement and traveled across the country to a place she'd never seen. His eyes found hers across the room, warm with love. "Who has filled my life with more joy than I ever thought possible. Who is perfect, exactly as she is." Winifred blinked back happy tears as their friends and family raised their glasses. Looking around at the home they'd built together, at their children now growing into fine young adults, at the community that had become her own, she knew that she had found what every person seeks: a place to be completely, authentically herself, and to be loved for exactly who she was. When the guests had departed, and the house was quiet save for the gentle creaking of its timbers in the night breeze, Vernon found Winifred on the porch, gazing out at the starlit landscape of their ranch. "Happy?" he asked, wrapping his arms around her from behind. She leaned back against him, secure in the embrace that had been her sanctuary for 2 decades now. "Completely," she replied. "And you?" Vernon turned her gently to face him, his hands tender on her waist, the same hands that had steadied her when she stepped down from the stagecoach on that fateful day in Austin so many years ago. "I'm the luckiest man in Texas," he said simply. "Maybe in the whole world." As his lips met hers in a kiss no less passionate for all the years between them, Winifred Walker knew the truth of what Vernon had told her on their first day together. She was perfect, just as she was, and in his eyes, she always would be.